With the NFL draft over and done with, it is time to go out and give our grades to each and every single team. I have 8 videos lined up for you guys, each and every division, and letting you know how I felt about each and every team, what they did in their premium picks, their trades, their reaches, their steals. I wanted to give some context behind what these grades actually mean when I hand them out, and especially for day 3, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Days 1 and 2, the value and how good of a pick they were, but for day 3, I'm not going to sit here and hyper-analyze every single team's, 6th and 7th round pick and nitpick them and say, well, he was wide receiver 28 on my board and, you took him over wide receiver 24. It's like, at that point, it's just a little annoying to just go and nitpick every single draft pick. So most day 3 picks will be C plus, a fine pick. I'm not gonna like overly bury a team for that. C minus, I'll have picks that maybe I'm not as much of a fan of, but still, it's a 6th and 7th rounder. If you get a B minus, it's like that's a nice pick. I'm interested. I think that was a solid pick, a solid fit, decent value. If you get a B or better, and there was plenty of day 3 picks that got B plus, even A pluses in day 3, so that kind of scales upwards for how good of a value and how good of a pick that you made. I put in a lot of effort during this draft season, making sure I had like over 200 players scouted and got everything down, graded these things, and got the videos up to you as quick as I possibly can, so any support would be much appreciated. But I will be going through each of these teams in their divisions, I guess from worst to best, among the 4 teams. So let's get into our first team, that being in the NFC East with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the NFC East was the best performing division. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to do it first, because this was the division where every single team got a B or better. And I think it's important for me to say off the bat a distinction that needs to be made. The grades cumulatively aren't off just the haul that you got. Of course, the Cowboys, for example, had a better haul cumulatively than Washington maybe, because they had like twice as many picks, but it's not about the amount of picks that you get and the amount of players that you get. It's about what you do with the picks that you have. So while Washington had like 5 picks, maybe I thought they did better with their 5 picks than Dallas did with their 9 picks. So, that goes into it. It's not about the cumulative haul. It's about what you do with the picks that you have. So starting with Dallas, and for Dallas, I still thought they did a solid job. They get a B grade from me, 14th to 18th in the NFL. I put them into tiers where, all the teams that got a B grade, that was 14th to 18th in the league. So middle of the pack. I thought it was a solid draft. And honestly, I would be saying a lot different things about this draft if the first round went a little bit differently for Dallas, because it was pretty clear that they wanted a couple of other players that didn't quite fall to them. Genty didn't fall to them. I'm pretty sure they would have taken him if he was there. Tet McMillan would have probably been a pick if he was available to them. And if they had picked either one of those two, I would have given the grade obviously much higher. But even if they picked Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, I'm sitting there terrified of this defense. So, Tyler Booker, for me, was very firmly a day 2 player, like not even somebody I would have considered in the first round. I don't think Booker is a bad player. It's just the athleticism is a genuine concern. He is not a first round athlete, and it is going to be an ultimate test to see if in today's NFL, can an athlete as poor as him be a great player? I don't know the answer to that. The athleticism objectively is a concern. That's why I had him as a firm day 2 player. So I don't hate the player. I just think it's too high to pick him. I think he actually could be a good player, which is why I give it a C plus. It's like, it's okay in some aspects because I get it, but it's a reach. It objectively is a reach to take Tyler Booker at 12. Now, it was looking a little rough for Dallas, and then they go and hit a home run in day 2. That's where the bulk of this grade comes in, where they go at the 44th pick and take Donovan Ezaraku, who I was not, in the top 20 for Ezaraku hype. A lot of people thought he could go like top 20 or thought he was one of the 20 best players in this class. This was about where I had him. I had him a little bit higher. I think I had him, in the mid 30s for my draft board. But this is good value for Ezaraku and a player that could have went round 1. I wouldn't have been shocked if he did. And this is a position that Dallas really did need because of the fact that they lost DeMarcus Lawrence. Now, Ezraku's a much different player than DeMarcus Lawrence, but you needed edge help because also the impending Micah Parsons contract. You don't know what that's going to look like and if they're going to keep Micah Parsons. You assume that they will, but with Micah playing a multitude of different roles on that defense and not just playing stand-up edge, I'm really interested in this new young edge duo of Donovan Ezraku and the guy from last year, Marshawn Nealon, who in his limited playtime I thought played pretty well last year. So I think for Cowboys fans, you got to be pretty excited for what Ezraku, Nealon, and Micah Parsons as a trio when they're on the field. You get Ezraku on one side, you get Nealon on the other side, you get Micah Parsons going through the middle. That seems like a really fun trio. And if Mozzie Smith wants to take a step up and prove that he was worthy of a first-round pick, and you got Odigizua, you re-signed him, this could be a really nice defensive line. It does hinge on potentially, a guy like Mozzie Smith taking a step up. That's why I'm sitting here saying, like, man, if they took Kenneth Grant in the first round, this defense is terrifying. Because you then go to the third round, and you go and get one of the best steals of the draft at Chavon Revel, who should have not been here. He just shouldn't have been here. I didn't give out a bunch of A+. I wasn't just handing them out left and right, but Chavon Revel at the 76th pick is more than deserving of an A+ grade. It is crazy that he was here. I understand that he had a knee injury, but he's not like, Will Johnson at least, or Ben Morrison, where the hip injury for Ben Morrison is a concern, and you don't know if that's going to affect him long term. And with Will Johnson, this is very recent injury news that came out about him. Revel, he should be good to go for the season. This isn't a player that you have to have a redshirt year for. Maybe they will, but you don't need to. He's probably going to play next year. So this isn't like a guy who's slipping because he's just not going to play next year. Like it happens a number of times for guys who get injured right before like the draft process happens, and then they miss their rookie season or they don't play their rookie season much at all. I think Revel should be good to go. And for Dallas, this is just a great pick. This is a team that Trayvon Diggs has just been brutalized with injuries. You have a Deron Bland contract coming up. They do need corner help because Bland is not an out-and-out number one. He's a solid, nice number two, but Revel does have number one corner upside, and I would not be surprised if down the line this is the Trayvon Diggs replacement, because I have to really worry about what the future of Trayvon Diggs is with the amount of just banged up, awful injuries that he keeps getting. And Dallas has to cut money somewhere. This is a team that pays their players quite a bit. Dak is really high paid. CD, you got the Micah contract. You got all these other players that you gotta have to pay. You're gonna have to cut costs somewhere. And I think Trayvon Diggs might be a place where you start to cut costs. And Revel, I think, is going to step in and eventually be a great corner for this team. It was an absolute steal to get him, one of the steals of the draft. And then when you go to their day three, this is where I have questions about their day three decision making. This is a team that very much was desperate for running backs and receivers. This is a team that currently has Javonte Williams as their starting running back, and outside of CD Lamb, Jalen Tolbert, and a bunch of other guys, you needed wide receivers, you needed running backs. Jaden Blue was their top pick in day three, and Jaden Blue is an interesting player to, for a team that needs a running back, because he's not a traditional running back. This is not a guy who you're going to be giving the football to on first and second down very often. This is a third down pass catcher, maybe on third and longs, you give him the draw play, you give him the screen. This is a dude who's not going to be a traditional running back for you. This is a pass catcher out of the backfield who can occasionally hit a home run. He's got that level of speed and he's young, but this isn't, a true 3-down back or a 2-down back. This is just a third down back. So it was like, okay, you took Jaden Blue, that'll help the passing game a little bit, but like, you're gonna take a receiver? You got a 5th, a 6th, you got 3 7s. They didn't take a receiver. And it's not like there wasn't any on the board. There were some receivers that slipped down the draft. And then in the 7th round, they took Phil Maffa. Okay, maybe not the greatest pick. Once you get to the 7th round, obviously, I'm not going to nitpick running back picks, but it was just a fact that they took too long to make these picks. They're like running back by the time that they got to the 5th round, I think that there were some guys on the board that I would have really liked them to take. I think of guys who slipped down the board, Damian Martinez, Kyle Monungai. You had some guys really slip down who could have been really effective 2-down backs for you, but it really seems like this team is kind of in on Javonte Williams because you don't draft Jaden Blue to be your top running back pick if you're not confident that Javonte Williams is going to be at least your 2-down back, and then you're going to go and give Jaden Blue the 3rd down reps. Maybe they go out and sign like Nick Chubb. Maybe they go out and sign one of these other veterans. But I would have liked to see them address especially wide receiver more. I mean, they didn't address that at all. So for their day 2, it carried them. That's what carried their grade. The day 2 was a home run. Ezeraku and Revel in day 2 is an incredible day 2, among the best day 2s in the draft. I think Tyler Booker, I think he can be successful, but I think it's very reasonable to worry and reasonable as a Cowboys fan to sit there and say, man, I'm not in love with that pick. There was definitely better players on the board. And then in day 3, I think, Jaden Blue could be exciting. Cornelius, I thought, was a solid pick for tackle. I'm not a big Terrence Steele guy, so maybe you have your potential developmental tackle of the future, maybe. But I would have liked to see this team address wide receiver and address some needs that they had a little bit more. But yeah, like the day 2 is what really gave this team a B. If the day 2 didn't exist, it was looking pretty rough for them. But ultimately, though, you get a true starting edge rusher, you get a true starting corner. You do get a starting offensive lineman. So you get 3 potential starters and, a maybe long-term tackle in Cornelius and a 3rd down back in Jaden Blue. Very solid draft class, a very okay draft that you can be pretty satisfied with. I think Cowboys fans should be at least pretty okay with this draft. I think that the only knock on it is that they didn't address wide receiver. So other than that, I thought it was a really nice class. And then how about the team that kind of tied? There's 2 B pluses in here. So I put Washington down first here as the number 3 team in the division. And this is an example of it's not always about the amount of picks you have. It's about what you do with the picks that you do have. And I thought Washington did a pretty solid job with their picks. I know that, I think, especially for Washington fans, they weren't, like, jumping for joy at the Josh Connerly pick. But to say Josh Connerly wasn't worthy of a 1st-round pick is a little crazy. This is about where I had him. I think I had him, like early 30s on my board. So I think this is a good spot for him to go. This team is building up an offensive line that is going to have their hands full, because one major criticism that I've seen of Washington's offseason in general is they keep stacking up their defensive line against all the teams in the division. You're like, man, the Giants got Abdul Carter, and the Eagles have Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, and the Giants also have Brian Burns, and the Cowboys, they added Ezeraku, and they got Micah Parsons and all these things, and Washington, they're just sitting here with Dorrance Armstrong, and it's like, I understand that, but I'm also sitting here saying, well, if all these teams are adding all these pass rushers, I want to draft guys to block them. I'm not trying to match their pass rush. I want to block these guys. I took our draft picks and I turned those into Josh Connerly. I turned those into Laramie Tunsil. I want to block Micah Parsons. I don't want to have to try to match Micah Parsons and Abdul Carter in sacks. I want to block them. And, maybe they're not going to have the best of times in this division because you got to go against those teams 6 times a year cumulatively. But I'd rather take my assets and try to block them than try to outdo them in the pass rush and not really succeed. I mean, this team is not going to have the level of a defensive line as any of the teams in the division. Even if a Jerzon Newton breakout happens and some other guys step up, it's just not going to happen. I'm going to take my assets, 1st rounder, Josh Connerly, trade our other day 2 picks for Laramie Tunsil. I'm going to try to block them. We have Sam Cosmi coming out here. Hopefully he'll be back during the season from his injury. Tyler Biadasz was a really good center last year and a great signing. This is an offensive line that has quickly become, altogether one of the better offensive lines in the league. So I'd rather have that, and especially for Jaden Daniels, because you don't want him on his back to Jalen Carter, Micah Parsons, Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, and all these guys. You do not want him flat on his back getting tortured by these guys. So yes, this was the right decision. Me personally, being a Washington fan, I was sitting here saying there was other players I want. There was one other player I had my heart set on, but like, Josh Connerly makes sense. This was like, the smart pick was taking an offensive lineman, regardless of which one you thought it maybe should have been. If you think they should have taken Josh Simmons or somebody else, taking an offensive line here was the smartest long-term investment, especially with Jaden Daniels at quarterback and the entire defensive line that you have to deal with 6 times a year. Then you get to round 2, and they took one of my favorite players in the draft. Trey Amos was a guy that I talked up a lot in my big board video. I had him like, I think 30th or 31st or something like that. Like, I had a round 1 to 2 grade on him, and I talked him up so much for being one of the smartest DBs, maybe the smartest DB in the draft. Just such a technically sound player, and the guy that I said that, you know, if I wanted a true number 2 high-end guy who could just be a great complementary piece, be such a smart, reliable dude on the outside, I'd want Trey Amos. You know, maybe he doesn't have superstar number 1 upside of a guy like Revel or some other guys like Will Johnson. Maybe I'm not betting on him to be a true superstar. But if I want like the caliber of player of like a DJ Reed, who's just been such a number 2 great cornerback for so long, not a superstar, not a like maybe a little bit of an unsung hero around the league a little bit, because guys like DJ Reed maybe don't get the respect they deserve for being such a great number 2 corner. You know, that's such an underrated position. Number 2 corner is important. You know, you're not just covering the number 1s. You got a bunch of receivers in the NFL nowadays to cover. And for a team that is going to be getting hopefully a healthy Marshawn Lattimore, I know Marshawn Lattimore had a down year last year, but he was playing with a hamstring injury throughout the entire season. I will give him the benefit of the doubt moving teams mid-season with the hamstring injury that he was playing through, that, you know, he'll be better next year. So if this team gets Marshawn Lattimore at true number 1 cornerback form, then you get Trey Amos in there as your number 2. Then you had Mike Sainristil, who was awesome last year and proved that he could also play on the outside, which I didn't expect. I thought he would just be a designated great nickel corner, but he proved he could play on the outside too. And for a team that not too long ago, a year ago, was sitting here with Benjamin St-Juste and Emmanuel Forbes as their cornerbacks, having one of the worst cornerback rooms that I have seen in recent history, this team has turned around and said, we now have an argument for one of the best cornerback trios in the league. If Marshawn Lattimore, like I said, can get back to form, if Amos is as good as I think he will be, and Sainristil keeps up what he was doing after his rookie season, this is a trio of corners that is absolutely incredible. So the turnaround there is great, and that's an A-plus pick. The Amos should not have been here at pick 61. This was a dude that I thought the Bills should have taken at 30. Like, and even Washington themselves, they were saying, you know, after the draft, they're like, we were considering taking Amos with our round 1 pick. Like, that's how highly they thought of him. So to get him here at 61 is an incredible steal, an incredible pick, one of the best picks in day 2, along with Revel, which that's going to be a bit of a trend with these draft grades, is the cornerbacks. There's some really good cornerback picks in day 2. When we get to the day 3 section, Jalen Lane, I wasn't thrilled about the pick because of the fact that there was other receivers on the board, and I don't want to, you know, go off just saying you should have taken this guy, should have taken that guy, but there was a lot of receivers on the board that I had really high praise for and high grades on that I would have liked them to take. But Jalen Lane, isolated, is a guy who's going to be a nice punt returner. Washington objectively did need a return man, which is, you know, like, maybe not something you sit there and put on your list of needs as a return man as a high priority, but they needed a return man, a number 4, number 3 potential receiver. They needed receiver help. Jalen Lane fits, and he can give you some special team stuff. So solid pick there. Kane Madrino, developmental linebacker. A lot of these linebacker picks that we'll see in rounds 4, 5, 6, 7, it's just going to be like, maybe they become good. They're all developmental linebackers for the most part. It's just kind of like a lottery ticket with these guys. And then in the 7th round, this player intrigues me. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt was such a weird player because of what happened to him last year. This is a guy who only played in one game of the season, played pretty well, and then got ruled out due to ineligibility because the NCAA made just a mistake. The NCAA robbed this dude of a year, and because of that, he just had to sit at home, and he declared for the draft, and he played pretty well throughout the draft process and had a nice combine and had some nice stuff to him. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, man, if this dude got to play a final season and actually not get ruled out and not had basically a year robbed from him, I'm pretty sure he would have been a lot higher than a 7th round pick. And this was a dude that I did have graded on my running back board as a top 20 running back. So I'm sitting here saying this is a dude who flew under the radar because he got his final year stolen from him, and I think was better than a number of running backs taken in front of him. You know, obviously I don't want to sit here and pump up a 7th round pick, but this is a dude who is a lot better than 7th round talent. And I think actually if there is a player to keep your eye on, more so than Jalen Lane and Madrino, then I think it'd be Ja'Cory Krusky-Merritt for being a potential sneaky back on this team. This is a team also, keep in mind, they go like 4 or 5 deep at running back when it comes to giving guys carries. This is a team that, you know, wasn't just Brian Robinson, it was Austin Eckler, it was, you know, Jeremy McNichols, it was Chris Rodriguez. This team don't care. They'll give whoever the football. So I actually wouldn't be surprised if Krusky-Merritt plays this season and maybe steals a couple of reps from some players. So maybe this is just a personal pick, but for a guy who in one game last year ran for 100 yards, won the Shrine Bowl MVP, having a great performance, had a nice combine, did everything right during the draft process, and just had his final year stolen from him, keep an eye on him. I think it's worth it. So Washington overall, just 5 picks, but, you know, you nail your first 2 picks, I feel like, and then you maybe get some interesting stuff in day 3. This is definitely a draft where it's like, yeah, you didn't leave with a grand haul of talent. You didn't get 10 picks and leave with a bunch of players, but the picks you had, you made the most of them, and I thought they did a good job. So, you know, it's hard for me to give them a bad grade because what they had, they did well with it. And some people, I didn't factor this into the draft grading system, but like, some people do look at their draft and say, well, 1st rounder Connerly, 2nd round Amos, they had another pick that traded that for Marshawn Lattimore was their 3rd round pick. They traded another pick for the Laramie Tunsil trade, then the 5th rounder that they didn't have, that was Debo. Some people say like, oh, if you put their draft together like that, they left with all this talent. So I didn't factor that into draft grades. I just strictly stuck with the picks that they had. But again, I thought they did good with the picks that they did have. I thought it was good. So the other team that did receive the B+ was the Giants, because they had a really good draft other than their one interesting pick that they made. But Abdul Carter at 3, the absolute right pick, the best pick you could have made there, and somebody who is going to be an absolute nightmare on the defensive side of the football. When you got him on the edge, you got Brian Burns, you got Dexter Lawrence on the interior, you got, you know, if they decide to keep Thibodeau, he'll be a good 3, but I don't think they're going to keep him. But still, you have a really great defensive line now, especially when you go later on at Darius Alexander, and you've got other players there in that front to just be so difficult to block. It's going to be brutal for teams to try to defend this team with like a normal 5-man front to try to like not have somebody in there to chip Lawrence. And if you don't chip Lawrence, you got Carter on the edge, you can chip Carter, then you give potentially Lawrence somebody to just absolutely demolish. So this is a team that when you're going up against them, you're going to need to be constantly blocking 6, it feels like, because you're going to need to probably double team Lawrence on the interior, and you're probably going to need to chip Abdul Carter on the edge. So I don't want to block this team. I definitely don't. So that's one thing that at least the Giants have, like, one major strength to them, is that they're going to be hard to block. Then you go and trade up in the 1st round and take Jaxson Dart. So I can't in good faith give this a good grade. The thing is, this is not Daniel Jones to me. Even, like, just completely ignoring the fact that this is the 25th pick and not, like, a top pick, you know, like Daniel Jones was. Daniel Jones, to me, was, like, somebody who just didn't possess any of the upside, just was not worthy of the pick that he was taken in any just sort of way in the slightest. At least with Jaxson Dart, I see upside. I see something. It's just, you have to be so sure that you can do all of the work that it would require to build him from the ground up. A lot of people are bringing up, like, you know, comparisons, saying this is just as bad of a pick as Daniel Jones. Even if they took Jaxson Dart at 6, I don't think it's as bad as taking Daniel Jones at, like, 6. This is better, which low bar, yeah, but you're gonna need to pray that this is like Josh Allen when it came to Dable, where yeah, it's gonna be ugly for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but eventually it'll come together. That's the only way this is working. That you need to give him time, you need to let him learn, you need to sit him down and really help him understand that he is having to actually sit there and play an NFL offense and actually have to be a drop back passer because of the fact that he ran what was it, like I think 14% of his plays at Ole Miss were just true drop back passes, not like play action, screens, RPOs, predetermined reads, and everything like that. You need to teach him how to read. And, you know, this is always going to be coming down to a conversation of, was it just stuff that he wasn't asked to do, or can he not do it? I don't know if Jaxson Dart can do it. I just know he wasn't asked to do it, and the times that he did have to do it in the 10 to 15% of the time, it wasn't great. So, is there a world where Jaxson Dart becomes a good quarterback? Absolutely, because I do see that there is upside there, but I can't sit here and try to say that this is anything other than a desperation pick, a pick of just praying that you get a guy with upside, because other than Cam Ward, I would say the two highest upside quarterbacks in this draft were Jaxson Dart and Jalen Milroe. They didn't want to have to build Jalen Milroe's passing up from the ground up. Even though he does give you at least a floor as a runner, Jaxson Dart's floor is like rock bottom. His ceiling, I do think, is that of a solid quarterback. I think he could be okay. I think he could be better than whatever Daniel Jones was at his best. But again, this is a low bar that we're trying to cross here. He shouldn't start early on. I don't think that's crazy to say. I do wonder what this move is for the Giants, because I'm interested on the fact that, you know, Dable never got to really choose his quarterback. He was just kind of given what he had. And I wonder if he told them, say, hey, you give me a quarterback, you give me a couple of years, and I could turn him into something. I did it with Josh Allen, and now let me do it with Jaxson Dart. Would picking a Shador here, or picking too high of a floor quarterback, maybe not give him as long of a leash to keep his job? Maybe there's some job stuff taken into account there, where it's like, well, you can't fire me after 1 year taking Jaxson Dart. No one expects Jaxson Dart to be good in his rookie season. No one even expects him to be good in his second season. There's not that expectation there. You have to build him from the ground up. So the Giants organization needs to understand that this is going to take time. You can't just fire Dable next year. Like, you can't do that. Like, if that happens, you're basically just throwing away this pick, because what was the point? So this at least tells me that Dable has 2 to 3 years still to just go and finally build up his guy. I'm going to trust Brian Dable. I do like some of the tools of Jaxson Dart, but this is not a likely scenario where he becomes this great quarterback, and this is not going to be Josh Allen, I don't think. It's hard for me to give this a good grade. I would have steered clear, especially in the first round. If they would have picked him in day 2, I would have given it some leeway, but you picked him in the first round. You traded up to get him. I can't give that a high grade, even if I am at least semi-interested in the prospect of Jaxson Dart. I didn't have him anywhere near a first-round grade, but I'm interested to see if there's somebody that in this class, especially quarterback-wise, because spoiler alerts, it's not like I gave a lot of the quarterbacks drafted in this class a high grade. If there's any quarterback that I think that the D plus or the F or a C minus or whatever could look bad, I do think it would be Jaxson Dart, but I'm not betting on that. I talked about Darius Alexander and how dangerous that front is going to be. You know, it's just, I don't, like I said, I don't want to block that team. It's going to be brutal. But other than that Dart pick, again, I thought they did a really good job, even in day 3. Scadaboo was a player that I thought should have been picked in day 2. I had a pretty comfortable day 2 grade on him. And, you know, if a team took him, even I'd say like late second, I wouldn't have been mad at it, you know. But for a guy who should have been picked in the 3rd round, to get him here, top of the 4th round, and give yourself a really fun little duo right there with him and Tyrone Tracy, I like that a lot. I mean, he's going to give you stuff as a pass catcher. Him and Tracy are going to give you stuff as a pass catcher. Scadaboo, you need a guy who's going to be able to pound the football into the end zone. They struggled with that. They struggled in the red zone. Well, go and get yourself the guy who's got like one of the best noses for the end zone in the entire draft in Scadaboo, and a guy who, you get him and Tracy out there. Both of them are going to be difficult to cover in the pass catching game. You get both of them out there. You can get either one of them the ball through the air on the ground. It's going to give you a lot more versatility, especially when, this team just didn't address wide receiver other than Malik Neighbors. Then, maybe they're going to make up for it with a great ground attack. Then, 5th round, Marcus Bowe. That's a great pick. I really just don't know why he was down here at 154. This was a player that he just barely cracked my top 100. Thought he was a really solid player to be, picked in the 3rd to 4th round is kind of where he should have probably went. I thought for a 4th round pick, it would have been a solid pick, but to get him at 150 in the 5th round, yeah, take that all day. And, this is a team now that hopefully they just can phase out Evan Neal little by little and make sure Evan Neal never has to step foot on field for them again. And they could start to build up this offensive line for whoever is quarterback, whether that is Dart, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, whoever it is at quarterback. Then you get 2 7th round picks, you get a tight end, you get a cornerback, fine stuff. Not going to really, go too in depth on that, 2 7th round picks. But this is a team that, with their top 5 picks, I think they went 4 for 5, and the one that I think they missed is still a quarterback that maybe, again, not betting on it. I personally would never. Like, that's kind of where the grade comes from me, is even though I see the upside, I wouldn't do that, but I at least see the vision, and I'm going to trust Dable as an offensive mind because I do think Brian Dable's really slept on as a coach, and, he's been dealt a bad hand in New York, and I'm glad for the sake of him that New York didn't just immediately scapegoat him and fire him the first chance that they got, because that's how it goes nowadays with coaches. You get a short leash, and if you're bad for, an extended period of time, you just get let go no matter how good of a coach you are. I think Dable is one of the 32 best head coaches in the league pretty comfortably. I'd say probably top 20 at the very least. He should keep his job, and I think that having Jaxson Dart is going to allow him to keep his job, and for his sake I do hope it works out. And for the rest of the drafts, I think your other 4 picks, you nailed them. I mean, Carter, Alexander, Scadaboo, Bowe, nailed those picks, so you get a B+. If you took the Jaxson Dart pick out, this is a A-, maybe even an A draft, depending on what you do with the stuff that you traded up for Jaxson Dart. So I do think it was a really nice move by the Giants, and hey, maybe Jaxson Dart's the guy. I don't know. Let me know what you think, I guess. If you genuinely think Jaxson Dart is going to be the guy, I would bet no, but let me know what you think. And then the stinking Eagles did it again. So there were 5 teams to get an A grade. The Eagles were one of them. They did it again. They had another good draft, and it's so weird how a draft strategy of simply just sitting there and like picking the best player on the board is just something that is a concept that a number of teams just don't understand. And I know there's luxury of being a good team like the Eagles and not having as many needs, but talent is talent, and at some point there are teams that shouldn't be ignoring some of the talent that is on the board. So you start off in round 1, and the Eagles just sit there, and they traded up 1 spot to take Jahad Campbell. Wow, you gave up a 5th round pick to get Jahad Campbell, who is an incredible player. Now, he fell because of some shoulder issues that he potentially has, but are you kidding me? Put Jahad Campbell next to Zach Bond, who just came off an all-pro season and is also a pretty good athlete at the linebacker spot, and then you go and get a supercharged athlete at Jahad Campbell, who's also a really great coverage player. If he does not have shoulder issues or injury issues, and he's just clean and he's good to go, this is the best linebacker duo in the league potentially, and it's terrifying because this is already one of the best defenses in the league, and you're sitting there saying, well, yeah, they lost Josh Sweat, they lost Milton Williams, and then they kind of cut bait with some older players. Like, losing James Bradbury, CJ Gardner-Johnson, and Darius Slay doesn't really, affect me. Like, those are non-factor losses in my opinion. Maybe Darius Slay you would have preferred to keep, but you didn't lose anything by getting rid of those guys. I do think losing Brandon Graham hurts. I think losing Milton Williams hurts. I think losing Sweat obviously hurts. But, in the secondary, you didn't lose much, especially because of what you did in the second round. How about going from CJ Gardner-Johnson, who's one of the most inconsistent, kind of playmaking happy safeties in the league, where he will abandon stuff to try to make a play. He wasn't a good tackler. Like, Gardner Johnson was a lot more talk than he was good player. And then you go and you get Andrew Makuba to close out the second round. Are you kidding me? Andrew Makuba is an amazing pick for the Eagles. And I would even argue maybe even better than the Jahad Campbell pick, just in terms of what he's going to do for that defense. Like, you didn't even, I don't think, need Jahad Campbell that badly. You needed Andrew Makuba. And that dude's going to step in as the best safety on that team day one. Better than Blankenship, better than what CJ Gardner-Johnson was. I have such high praise for Andrew Makuba and the incredible player that he is in coverage. This is a dude who is going to give you ball production, give you turnovers, won't blow as many tackles as Gardner Johnson did, and also is just a lot more disciplined, especially at his age. This is just such an incredible pick, and I just had to sit there and watch it happen. I'm like, man, why did he not get taken earlier, and why did the Eagles have to take him? And it's at that point you just have to sit there and be like, man, what do you even do? Because just these great teams just sit there and grab these great players at these great spots, and it was just a really interesting draft for the secondary as a whole, where I'm just sitting there saying, like, I understand why Will Johnson, I understand why Ben Morrison, I even understand to an extent why Shavon Revel, but why was Trey Amos, why was Andrew Makuba, why were some of these other guys in the secondary just sitting there? And it's like, man, well, great, you let Washington get Trey Amos, you let the Eagles get Andrew Makuba, how fun dealing with that. And, for the league, how fun dealing with Cooper DeJean, Andrew Makuba, and Quinyon Mitchell for the next decade. That's going to be brutal. Like, it's just going to be ridiculous. Then this team, had a number of day 3 picks. You have Jordan Davis, you have Jalen Carter, but you used Milton Williams as that number 3. You rotated him in quite a bit. You're going to hope Ty Robinson can become that. And I do think Ty Robinson was a really nice pick here in the 4th round. I thought it was pretty solid value at a position that they needed. I wasn't like, going crazy for like Mac McWilliams, solid pick, Mondin, okay, I'm intrigued, especially since, this team is now like rich on linebackers, and of course you had to hit your Georgia quota, you had to get a Georgia player somewhere. Drew Kendall, sure, I mean, it's the Eagles with offensive line, they're probably going to develop that dude into an all-pro too, but then you go to the 6th round, and I'm sitting here like, man, this is where the draft really takes that step into an A, because up until the 5th round, I'm sitting there like, it's a pretty nice draft. You nail your first 2 picks. Ty Robinson's really nice. I'm thinking, all right, nice little B+, A-. You're doing pretty good stuff. Then you go and grab Kyle McCord in the 6th round, and I know this team doesn't need a quarterback. They got Jalen Hurts, but, man, Kyle McCord, I really like him. Kyle McCord is a dude who I had higher ranked than a number of other quarterbacks. I think Kyle McCord is really good, like for a 6th round pick. I have to preface this by saying, for a 6th round pick, this is a dude who I had ranked a lot higher than 181. I had a 4th round grade on him. This is a dude who, if I was betting on any random day 3 quarterback, now I wouldn't have predicted Shador would have went day 3, so I guess aside from Shador, if I was betting on any day 3 quarterback to become good, I would have bet on Kyle McCord. And the Eagles just sit there and grab themselves a really great backup who has some starter traits. That's kind of where I get really excited about Kyle McCord, because he does have some starter traits. If Jalen Hurts, who, does put his body on the line, does get hit, does have some issues where he'll get banged up, if he goes down, you don't got to worry about Kenny Pickett coming in there and stinking it up. Kyle McCord being your backup quarterback now is going to be so much better. And for a team that already had so little needs to fill, yeah, you go and get yourself what I think could be one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league. Yeah, it's a great pick in the 6th round. And then, because they had to go another 20-something picks later, they couldn't go too long without making a good pick. But getting Cam Williams in the 6th round, 207 overall, what are we doing? Like, why was he here? Why was he here? like, I understand that Cam Williams, like, he's a bit of a project. He's got some work to do. I still had him in just barely in my top 100. He was a dude who I'm like, yeah, I mean, I see it in the third round. If someone took him in the third round, like, okay, but like that's a dude I'm taking in like the fourth round, and I'm thinking like, yeah, he could develop into eventually a pretty nice tackle for you. And it's like, oh great, Cam Williams gets to go in the sixth round, gets to sit behind Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson. He's gonna eventually probably take over for Lane Johnson and become a Pro Bowl tackle. I mean, they've done this before. One of my favorite players that they took a couple of years ago was Cam Jurgens. They took Cam Jurgens, and you're like, well, they don't need a center right now, but it's like, yeah, sit behind Jason Kelce, play a little bit of guard, but sit behind Jason Kelce, learn, develop, and now look at him. He gets a big contract extension. He's a Pro Bowl center. He's one of the better centers in the league, and they're gonna do it with Cam Williams again. Like, they're gonna do it again. He's gonna, in 4 years' time, if Lane Johnson's gone, he's gonna be their starter. So great, you let the Eagles go and get themselves a potential starting tackle down the line. So it's crazy how simply just sitting there and taking like good players is a good draft strategy. It's so simple, but a couple of other teams, they did do it. A couple of other teams, there's one team we'll get into later on in these videos where it's like, man, nailed the draft every single pick. The Eagles, though, you go and get yourselves, a potential best linebacker duo in the league with Jahad Campbell, Zach Bond, Andrew Makuba. Please acknowledge how good Andrew Makuba is going to be on this team. And then Kyle McCord, Ty Robinson, Cam Williams. I mean, you go out there with just a bottom of the first round pick, a bottom of the second round pick, and a bunch of day 3. And in total, you come out of it with a starting linebacker, a starting safety, a rotational D lineman, a backup quarterback, and a potential starting tackle down the line for you, plus a bunch of other players that could be contributors on like special teams and stuff. It's a great draft. The Eagles do it every year. They put up a great draft, so they get an A grade for me. Let me know what you thought of each of these teams' draft. Eagles, Washington, Dallas, New York. Let me know what you thought of them. Was it too high, too low on any of these drafts? What players on each of these teams maybe do you see the most interest in? Is there any sleepers you got here? Maybe I was sleeping on one of these guys in day 3. Maybe I'm a little too disrespectful in like Jaxson Dart or Tyler Booker for your liking, or maybe I'm a little too high on my praise for Andrew Makuba, or maybe you think Washington shouldn't have taken Josh Connerly, or whatever the case is. Let me know what you all think. I hope you guys all enjoyed. I'm going to be pumping out these videos throughout the next week, all 8 of them. So it's going to be a lot of work. Any support is much appreciated. Like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys all in the next one.